I want to say first that it might be a little loud in the background here. I fortunately was able to get away from COVID and go park myself and my family at the beach for the week. But I'm here to welcome everybody to the June installment of Mindgrub's virtual speaker series. Today, I'm joined by 4 of the cybersecurity industry's leading experts to discuss post-COVID-19 cyber hygiene. We're going to look at how businesses of every size and type can secure their futures in a changed world. But before I introduce myself and the other panelists, I want to share one housekeeping note for the attendees. We're going to encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation. So as we discuss, you'll notice a chat feature in the bottom of the screen. Please go ahead and add any questions. The question is being moderated by Mindgrub's marketing team. And we're going to reserve time at the end around 1:45, 1:50 or so. We're going to reserve 10 to 15 minutes for any questions. You can also, I encourage you to ask questions of specific panelists by putting their name in the actual chat. So you can do a little to that person, but put it in the chat. All right, let's get started. So I'm Todd Marks, CEO and founder of Mindgrub Technologies. I'm going to moderate the discussion today. Mindgrub is an agency and a consultancy, and one of the larger industry segments that we work on or work in is the cyber industry. We're based in Baltimore, Maryland, and we have offices along the East Coast. I'm joined today by our esteemed panelists. First, we have Dana Pickett, the Chief Information Security Officer at Edwards Performance Solutions, a women-owned small business that combines executive-level expertise and process improvement approaches to incorporate cybersecurity into an enterprise's organizational culture. Next up is Angela Murphy. She currently serves as the operating officer of Sontiq, a high-tech security and identity protection company, arming businesses and consumers with award-winning products, including Easy Shield and Identity Force. Third, we have Chris Ensey, Chief Technology Officer at Voyant. They provide advanced cyber threat intelligence, managed security services, and proactive professional services with forensic capabilities for incident response and remediation to enterprises worldwide. And finally, a special thanks to Kent Wilson, Vice President of Customer Experience at Bricata, for joining us today. Bricata provides network security that combines signature inspection, anomaly detection, AI-based malware conviction, and threat hunting. All right. So we're going to move on to our panelist Q&A now. And as I said, we're going to get up to about 1:45. So we'll run for about 35 minutes. Please do ask any questions along the way. Because we want to keep this interactive, and we will answer those at the end. All right, so Angela, I want to begin our discussion today with a question for you. It's been well documented that cyber attacks have increased since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Can you describe some of the most common attacks that are occurring and expand upon why businesses and individuals might be more susceptible than usual?
Yeah, I sure can. Thanks for the question. You're right, cyber attacks have increased pretty dramatically since the pandemic began. And honestly, the cyber criminals know that the most effective way to gain access to business information and funds is through employees. The FTC has been very vocal about a number of different types of scams that target employees of large and small companies. Things like government check scams and business email scams and data scams. And these types of things can infiltrate business systems from many different entry points, putting both the employees and the businesses at risk. Sontiq helps thousands of small businesses and consumers who've been the victims of identity crimes and fraud. So you can imagine that our calls that we get have increased tenfold in the last few months. Right now, the things we see most often involve fake websites, phishing scams, business emails being compromised, robocalls, things like that. These cyber criminals are pretty creative, and they take advantage of what's hot in the news and the opportunities to prey on people's fears. So they spoof government and healthcare websites. They even put up fake job postings to steal personal information. Small businesses are being targeted significantly with phone calls and emails around stimulus checks and work from home scams. We've even seen a number of customers calling who have fallen victim to fake promotions around miracle cures for COVID and vaccines. In fact, actually 80% of the scams that are reported to the FTC are right now using a coronavirus theme. We see a lot more, I'm sorry?
How many people reported scams and on Instagram, and it's like, oh, those shoes look perfect for me. And the website looks brilliant. It looks like a normal e-commerce. Like it looks like just a brilliant shoe company, and yet people got scammed all over the place.
Exactly. And with 40 million people being unemployed, unemployment identity theft is now affecting people actually with and without jobs. Tax fraud's always been a really big problem, obviously, in tax season, as identity thieves steal millions of dollars in tax refunds. But now that the federal filing date has been extended to July, it's expanded that window as well. AT&T reported 400% growth in web traffic, including video conferencing, like we're all on right now. Many of us are regularly using Zoom and Microsoft Teams conferencing, and all of these have seen a huge surge in use during the last several months. So pretty much every day we get an email with a video conference details or a link. And so fraudsters are taking advantage of that pretty significantly, sending phishing emails, linking to fake Zoom pages, etc.
Yeah.
If you're, sorry?
Oh, I was going to say, Dana, to piggyback off that, I know users now, at least employee side, used to be in the workplace, and that had a whole bunch of security kind of ramifications. But now with a distributed employees, not just the fact that they're way more vulnerable, as Angela pointed out, to a lot of the fraud that's online, but how does the fact that they're distributed at home factor into security as well?
So Todd, that's a great question. And here's the way I look at it. Wearing a CISO hat, and I've worn a CISO hat for 30 some years for large companies. I think what we're experiencing now with this pandemic is going to be part of the new norm, which means more and more people are going to be working from remote. That said, to me, I would just say that proper security hygiene needs to be something that's in front of everybody's mind, and leaders need to make sure that they're doing certain things for their employees, like rolling out periodic reminders. What does that mean? In other words, make sure your desktops have proper antivirus on it. Make sure that you're coming in through a secure Wi-Fi. Make sure you're using a company-approved laptop/machine, not a personal machine. So I think it's extremely important that now more than ever that good security hygiene, Gene, and proper training is important. And to me, with that said, we're all remote nowadays. Everybody understands how to work in a remote world. So you can make sure that training continues to occur even though you're not at your company site.
Absolutely. So we covered kind of the consumer with Angela, and Dana, we really looked at the remote aspect of it. Ken, I know you look at a lot of times third parties that are on the network. How has that changed with COVID now?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that COVID has brought to the table for those third-party vendors and just for companies that are working with third parties is a new set of threat vectors. But it's funny, all of this ties back even to that first question about what's changed and with respect to some of the ways that people are being engaged. And one of the challenges is visibility. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about visibility for everybody. But organizations, there are three things really. Urgency, which is the reason why people make mistakes. There is the process of onboarding new vendors. There's a process of dealing with vendors that are currently in place. And then there's the visibility that you need to maintain in order to actually effectively secure an environment for your employees and for those vendors. And so I think the biggest changes or the biggest things that employee organizations need to be aware of as they're working with new vendors is that that urgency that pushes them to onboard people more quickly. They need to be able to pump the brakes a little bit and make sure that they stay focused on some key components and not sidestep maybe the traditional risk management that they might be doing. You know, I know organizations like Dana's do risk management for vendor risk management, or there's TPRMs out there that make that easy enough to do. So streamlining that needs to come down to maybe not having so many people approving along the way, but you still need to get that security information from your vendors. And then the other part is, once you've got these people onboarded and you've got people working within your environments, I mean, healthcare has been really impacted by all of this. You think about the number of new systems that were being engaged and involved, and the number of people then that get brought in to go ahead and make all that work. If they're bringing in their own laptops, or if they're working from company systems, as that perimeter disappears, you need to make sure that you still got visibility on the network traffic that they're generating on their endpoints, so that they're not leaking data out unbeknownst to them. I mean, 20%, the numbers I heard recently was 20% of the most recent HIPAA breaches were really based on what's up on HHS, were from third-party vendors. So it's a big gap for people, and if you're not paying attention and keeping that visibility up, you're going to run into problems.
So policy probably comes in quite a bit. I was going to say, I think, Chris, you focus on really not just policy, but really what has to happen at different levels of the organizational chain. So as we're noticing that there's increased risk across the organization, and several organizations haven't even implemented any cybersecurity for the first time, right? And they're just showing up and they're saying, Chris, we need to have cybersecurity, from what I hear. You know, where do you start and how do you implement things across the organization?
Yeah, Todd, that's a great point. I think a lot of organizations now are just dipping their toe in the water for the first time. Then you have the super mature organizations that have been in the game. They've seen the landscape evolve. They're now reacting to a distributed workforce, and everybody's got to rally together and start the communication process, which is a big change when you start thinking about how one single action can damage an organization at any level. And the point I think you're making by saying, where does it start, at what part of the organization, how do you establish lines of communication, is really around the information flow. And you know, the person in HR that's receiving applicants from across the world that are trying to find jobs, to the folks that are now dealing with now changing policy to actually enable people that are working remote and fielding maybe sometimes urgent need that's coming in and saying, all right, how do I break our current policies or risk tolerance to be able to enable something to happen that we could normally just walk down the office in the hallway and get to somebody and say, hey, I need an approval. That's changing the dynamic of communication within these organizations, and in such a way that I think the compromises that can occur are, you know, being tested. There's new playbooks for the adversary that can come in and try out new tactics that maybe wouldn't have worked prior, because someone would just knock on the door a few doors down and say, hey, I got this strange email. What'd you say? What'd you mean by this? Now it's, I expect these people to be remote. I expect them maybe inaccessible at times. So there's this tendency to want to be helpful. And I think organizations have to get people together very aggressively and start communicating, hey, here's what we expect of you, and here's what seems and should be out of the common norm for communication. If they say, if we go outside of this scope of what we deem acceptable, just like you'll hear from support administrators saying they'll never ask you for a password over email or over chat. The same holds true internal to the organization, as you say, hey, we're never going to ask you to break a policy without a ticket that has risk acceptance from many people within the organization that allows that process to be changed. So there's a continuity of communication that has to be now changed, established for a new norm, and it's going to be directly impacted by COVID-19, and then also future changes when we go to more diverse use of distributed workforce across many industries.
No, that's a great point. Actually, going back to like Angela with Easy Shield, that, you know, looks at some of the individual kind of protections. At Mindgrub, somebody in HR got an email from apparently me. It said, hey, this is Todd. I need you to switch up my bank account to this for my paycheck. And naturally, I would just send an email just like that to somebody, right? And so fortunately, she knew to come back and ask me, but I was amazed in the fact that, like, really crafty, just, this is Todd, please switch up my paycheck. They might only get one, but, you know, I think they're thinking
all it takes.
The CEO's paycheck, that's a pretty decent paycheck. Little do they know.
Yeah. That's very true, Todd. And in fact, human error and failures lead to almost half of the data breaches. So
Yes.
it really behooves people to train their employees, train them on the security risks. And now that everyone's remote, we're not just talking about business information or personal information, we're talking about both because you're intermingling. And so it becomes, these hackers are smart and they watch and they know how you talk. And so they're not going to get the email with, real formalities in it when that's not how you operate on a daily basis. So they're really smart.
Right. It looked like, I guess syntactically and semantically, it looked like I said it. Like you would have thought I wrote that email, except for the fact that it didn't come directly from my email, although it had my name on it, of course. Or it might actually, I take that back. It did come from my email. They spoofed my email. So it looked like, as far as they were concerned, it had come from me. But when they looked at the server, it didn't come off, Gmail.
Right.
So
Right.
anyway, so Ken, with all of this, we talked about policy change. We've talked about, organizationally making sure there's, levels of policy at different levels. We talked about individuals, third-party vendors. What about some of the infrastructure now? How has that changed post-COVID? Now that people are working remotely, how's the tech changed?
How's the tech changed? I think as we move towards a cloud-centric future state for a lot of folks, I think the tech is changing in that as mentioned before, that the boundary, the perimeter has kind of disappeared on folks. So a lot of organizations are now working in sort of cloud-centric or cloud forward first infrastructures. They are maintaining hybrid infrastructures. And I keep going back to the visibility piece, but for all of this and the big change for folks is moving to areas that have new paradigms that they don't quite understand yet and are trying to replicate old paradigms. And so I think about the cloud environments. If you're going to go ahead and move into a cloud environment, you need to make sure you have real expertise in the platform that you're living in. Folks like AWS are not going to shore up or close down S3 buckets for you automatically. That's something you're going to have to understand and be able to do yourself. We see this sort of stuff all the time where people are just leaving themselves open to attack. And the other challenge is that if you don't have the visibility into that, if you haven't if you haven't applied some traditional intrusion detection measures or network monitoring measures, you're leaving yourself out there to get burned pretty badly. Of course, from my end and what we're doing at Bricata, a lot of the time we spend is helping people deploy great network security monitoring platforms in these hybrid environments or in these cloud forward environments, and relying on folks like Chris and Voyant to help people who don't have the expertise to understand what that monitoring is doing for them. So,
just to add to Ken's comment, we're seeing a ton of folks coming to the table and saying we're changing the way we set up our organization to actually scale this now, as they're seeing everybody shifting to on SaaS services, cloud infrastructure extremely rapidly, and they're saying we need some help in monitoring that. So that is a definite trend. It's an increasing trend that we're seeing, and we're also seeing because of the dynamic nature of these new environments that there's a steep learning curve for a lot of organizations. So they're seeking help just on how to get started, how to instrument it better, how to gather the data into a form they can actually interrogate and understand and find those needles within the haystack.
That's right.
It makes a lot of sense to have a lot of your business infrastructure in the cloud. I remember back in the day, somebody would, on your internal network, leave a server open, and at that point, somebody could hop on the network and not just come in through that one user's computer they happen to have a server open on their operating system, but then they can traverse the whole network. Now, I think cloud, having your infrastructure, your business operations separate from your internal network, I think that helps tremendously. Except, of course, you're not able to, you're not VPNing in necessarily. But you can set up, Ken, in that infrastructure, you can set up virtual VPNs, right? Even though you're no longer going from a third party to the cloud, if you have to get on a company network and you VPN into that cloud the same way you did before?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on how people are setting. I think there's a broad swath of ways that people are addressing that challenge with traditional methods, split routing, all kinds of different ways to address it.
Yeah, I would like to also add to that, Todd and Kent, that being a CISO, if you told me 7, 8 years ago we were going to put company information in the cloud, I would say not only no, but hell no. But I could tell you right now, cloud providers are spending more money on securing their environment than most companies are. So to back to Chris's point as well, to me, it's always good to look at your options. You have to really look at the data that you hold, not only for yourself, but for a customer. And based on that, decide, whether you want to do a hybrid, what type of infrastructure you want to do in the cloud. But I can almost guarantee you that, information in the cloud is probably better secure than that at on your company servers.
Yeah, absolutely. What are we going to do with all the IT guys that really want to have their servers and to touch them too? They either have to go, move themselves into the cloud, but we do face that a lot at Mindgrub, where we do a lot of software development. We're an agile shop. We do custom mobile apps, custom web apps in our consulting business. Do a lot of the middleware, so a data abstraction layer, and then there's tons and tons of services on the back end that we're integrating with all their APIs. And we're seeing most of those go to the cloud. But a lot of times we're coming across those old network environments that are on-prem. A lot of times they might not even have APIs. And so the question is, at what point do you have to move to the cloud, right? Do you see it coming because you have the Mindgrubs of the world knocking at your door and saying, you need us to VPN into your network to tunnel through, which creates a lot of, kind of overhead to it, and it slows the data down? Or can we just get into the cloud already and give us a RESTful API that we can get data to really nice and neat, right? At what point do you cut over, and at what point do you not cut over because it doesn't make sense to go into the cloud?
I think just a comment to that, you're finding that people doing it out of just speed of business requirements now, and to be able to stand up infrastructure in a colo or a data center even at this point is becoming almost a burden that they can't deal with. Because if we're all isolated, and even though some of us will be deemed essential, it doesn't change the fact that you still have to send gear to a physical location and rack and stack that gear and configure it and really physically get involved with it. And I think the cloud is driving speed of business in a meaningful way. And the problem you face is that the dynamics of securing cloud, configuring it properly, isolating specific components of the networking inside of it, is a policy-driven exercise, very different from what we've seen historically in traditional networking gear, routing and switching. It's a completely programmatic manner of doing it. So I think people are having to very rapidly learn it and adapt to that. And it's obviously exposed at times some flaws in the design, and the service providers give you a power tool. It's a totally powerful and open-ended framework, and you have to know how to work with it.
Yeah, I know my engineers and my DevOps guys, they talk about containers and Kubernetes and then the web-based firewall all the time. That's like, I hear those buzzwords, and it's to replace what was a hardware firewall. Right now, when we're coming onto these cloud-based services, we're not, as you said, hooking up the hardware and running the lines, but we're still adding a firewall. It's just software-based firewall. It's not a hardware firewall, right? And we still want to be able to have the equivalent of like hot swap drives and be able to, spin up and spin down drives, but now it's containers, on, virtual servers, right? So it's changed, but the concepts are still very much the same. Now, Dana, one thing as far as like policy is concerned, with all this pivoting from on-prem to the cloud, and now with potentially a reduction in human capital because of the recession, does that create additional challenges or potentially some opportunities?
So Todd, that's another good question, and I would answer it this way. I think the challenges has always been there. I think there's a lack of qualified cybersecurity professionals out there. We can't get them through a college 4-year degree or certifications quick enough. So you're right. Now with the pandemic world that we're living in, companies are looking at cutting costs. I'll go back to the comments we were just making about cloud versus not the cloud. I mean, I think it's time now for companies to do a good assessment of what they're spending. Again, no one wants to lose their job, and I'm all about repurposing people to do greater things. But I think companies need to look at this more holistically and say, listen, what are we spending on resources and writing our own code and doing all this homegrown stuff on-prem versus what we could get the same thing for with better security in the cloud. So part of that rolls over into cybersecurity support. I mean, I would argue that rather than try to train people up quick enough for just-in-time resources that you may need at your company, look at what all these service providers can offer out there. I mean, we've got these SOC providers. Everest is a service provider when it comes to offering you the entire suite of cybersecurity services. I mean, I would say now companies need to look at, can they do it cheaper by relying on third parties and partnering with other people? So to me, that's the direction that I think companies should be looking at. But I'll take it one step further, Todd. I think now's a time where people need to be more cautious of every time they see a breach notification or look at something on the dark web. First, they need to assess, does that really affect my industry? Does that really affect my company? And rather than putting resources out there addressing that, address the things that really are part of your business outcomes and what you need to be addressing day in, day out.
Oh, that's a great point, Dana. Angela, along those lines, I know we started things off talking about phishing attacks. From one of our clients the other day, I actually got from their IT team, they sent a notice that one of our employees had clicked on a phishing attack and they blocked it. But they wanted to let me know as a CEO that I had an employee that clicked on a phishing attack. And, it was a new consultant that just started the company. They probably got what looked like an official, hey, welcome to company email or something. But as far as they're concerned, it looked completely legitimate. So knowing that it's out there, what happens if someone's successful with a phishing attack? What does that cause and how do you unwind that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And most businesses and consumers alike don't believe that they can be the victim of a phishing attack. They think they're smarter than that. But unfortunately, as I said before, these criminals are pretty savvy and they know how to get around things. Unfortunately, the problem is not all breaches are identified or disclosed very quickly. So for example, like in 2019, the average time to determine that a breach actually occurred and to contain it was 279 days. So the fact is it can take months or even years to find out that someone has compromised your business's information or your personal information, either through your own business systems or through somebody else's. And that gives the cyber criminals a huge head start in dumping the data on the black market for sale, and criminals then using your information, either your business's information or your personal information, to start stealing funds and wreaking havoc on the business. Now, when a business is identifying information is compromised, things like employer identification number or DUNS number or state registry number, the criminals can take on the business's identity and they can target funds, they can access financial accounts, file fraudulent tax returns, take out loans. Basically, they can accumulate massive debt under your company's name, and that's it's horrifying. So if you know that you've been the victim of a successful smishing or phishing attempt, the best way to mitigate that is to be really diligent. Business owners should make sure that they're aware and they're proactively taking steps like monitoring their own business credit, deploying tools that will scan the dark web for their corporate domain and confidential information, etc. Passwords are a huge area of vulnerability, so it's amazing to me that only 33% of breach victims actually change their passwords. So when you think about the fact that the scammers get your credentials and then they go and they cycle through other sites where they find hits, and they can use your passwords and information to continue to steal from you. So we've all said it, and it's so important. updating passwords, educating employees, making sure that you've got VPNs in place, making sure people understand how vulnerable they can be through their mobile devices, and things of that nature are just hugely important.
So what you're saying is you shouldn't have the same password for every bank account?
That was the takeaway.
Yeah, in fact,
yeah.
I did a webinar recently where I know my 87-year-old father was listening, and I said to him, Dad, you can't use the dog's name on every site that you're on for your password.
Right?
So I'll say it again in case you're out there, Dad.
Yeah, no, very, very good advice. And don't write them down and put them under your keyboard either.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
the quickest thing. You ever want to get into a company's network, just start looking under keyboards.
Yep.
And you're going to come up with a password.
That's
Hey,
right.
Ken, we talked about third parties before, but a lot of company data is with a third party. Now that we're outsourcing and we have like the Mindgrubs of the world, accessing companies' data, how can you make sure, unlike, maybe the intrusions on your network you're monitoring, when you're giving your data to those third parties, how can you, kind of keep tallies on that data and make sure they're doing what they need to do?
Yeah, that is tough. I mean, the first thing that you need to be able to understand is what data is over there. I mean, so having really positive control of what data is making its way into their environments, and that stems from visibility, that stems from the agreements that you have with them. And then beyond that, I hate to say it gets really, really tricky. I don't know if anyone has better advice here, like Angela and team, but I think yeah, there's monitoring. Then it becomes a monitoring game and looking for things here.
So Kent and Todd, so I think here's where I'm going to put this plug in. Especially when data is going off-site to a third party, it's even more important that your company goes through a formal data classification and ownership exercise, because unless you know the data that you're holding, not only within your own company, but for other customers, and unless you classify that properly, you don't even want to go down the road of letting that, data go off-site to a third party. Because remember, the third parties that you do business with is an extension of your company. If they get breached, that's a negative brand damage to your company.
No, that's absolutely right. And that's at Mindgrub, we actually went through SOC 2 compliance. So most of our we work with energy companies, health companies with that, and a lot of e-commerce companies. So
Correct.
Between the three of them, we're talking a lot of personal identifiable information, whether it's account information with the credit cards, health data or health personal information, or with utilities, it's a lot of the usage and e-commerce data. We absolutely need to make sure that we're SOC 2 compliant. Anytime we get our hands on that data, there's protocols and process,
Right.
And we get audited and we have to report that back to our clients. So that seems to be a mechanism to make sure that we're in compliance with how they might otherwise hold their own data secure. Although I would say that it would be great if somebody took all of because each company is different. When you come up with your SOC 2 compliance, you're describing your own ways of how you store data and keep it secure. And there should probably be maybe a roll-up. If you're an IT manager of a large organization with a lot of third parties, maybe you roll up their documents and you actually go through them and you then distribute, here's how we would like you to handle our data specifically. And they do in MSAs and stuff, but it's pretty broad. I think we could get more, more granular with it now and more specific.
Yeah. And the other thing, Todd, to that point, especially now with CMMC in the government space, where you have to be able to really identify whether you hold any customer unclassified information. I mean, you have no choice but to go through formal data classification and ownership and make sure that you have proper policies and procedures in place that are being followed and so on and so forth. So we're in a different world now. And I think what's going to happen with CMMC in the government space is going to bleed over into the commercial space, where companies have no choice but to follow those guidelines as well.
I think that in the commercial space, you're seeing quite a bit of larger companies now actually dictating security, health and hygiene standards down to their supply chain. And especially in organizations that have critical supply chain partners that carry a very high probability of disruption for them if they have an issue or an event,
Right.
or they're stewards of their data. It is absolutely critical that they understand the standard by which they're managing their cybersecurity. And I in firsthand seen large companies hold up contracts because
Yes.
of perceived issues from an external viewpoint of their organization and their hygiene for cybersecurity.
For years.
No, it's a good thing though. I mean, as a consumer, you know, it's really important. And I never use the same password twice. I change them. All my credit cards, one of my tricks is I just replace my credit cards quarterly. It does two things. So one, it gets you to stop any subscription that you signed up for, which is really nice because when you just get a new credit card, it stops that. But the other thing too is, heaven forbid, I do a ton of travel and my card ultimately, and not right now, but generally do a ton of travel. My card ultimately does get out there. And there's little things. Sometimes they'll do just little dollar amounts and then they'll hit you once on a credit card once they think that they're in the clear. So, you know, those little dollar amounts, you don't even notice them necessarily, but by, you know, replacing my credit card quarterly, that helps. Anyway, but for each of you, I'd love to go, maybe starting with Chris, and then we'll go around. I'll call each of you, you know, in about maybe a minute, and then we'll leave, you know, that 10 to 15 minute windows for questions. What would you tell a cybersecurity team, the thing you should maybe do right now, or the next thing that you should do to really kind of combat some of these challenges that we're experiencing now with remote teams and that post-COVID era? What would you tell that cybersecurity team, Chris?
So I'm telling cybersecurity teams that they have to look around the room, the virtual room they're in, and say, okay, did we just get asked to do more with less? And if that's the case, and now let's start thinking about ways we can get some outside help to do the things that we don't have time to do every day. And that could be like reviewing logs, managing alerts, you know, reacting to endpoints that may look like they have had malicious activity on them, anomalous behaviors occurring on them. These are things that there's teams of people that run 24/7 that can do that type of work. Voyant, obviously, an example of a company that does that. But the things that they do well that are extremely applicable to the domain they work in, they focus on that. Focus on the things that they have context for, that they can actually deliver extremely high grade security readiness and coverage on, while they let sort of the bigger picture items that are high volume, but just general security tasking that go to an outside partner that they can work with. So I think that's a big piece of it. And then on the third party risk side, start thinking about your third parties now just more often, and really assess them, inventory them, and get a very good sense and handle on how they interact with your business on a day in, day out basis, especially in a highly decentralized and cloud focused and software as a service driven environment.
Great. Angela, same question to you. What's the one thing you tell the security teams now to go out and do?
Train and test. Test your employees. Test them with all kinds of scenarios.
Yes.
You'll catch them for sure, but they'll learn from it.
That's a great idea. Kent, what's one thing?
Yeah, I think just riding off of what Chris was saying, sitting there, having them look around the room, and as they're evaluating what they're good at, asking them if they've got the visibility they need to get the context that Chris was just talking about. So I think you know, you cannot protect what you cannot see, and that needs to be, you know, evaluated very seriously.
Great. Yeah, no, I definitely like that, because I know we're not testing. Well, we do test when we get audited. We certainly get tested, but it's really the auditor doing a bit of a manual test. But I know there's software out there that you can do phishing tests. We actually helped develop the software for dark web ID, an ID agent, and we created their dashboards. But then we also created a phishing instrument that they had, which would go into a company's network and just basically try to phish all the employees, which is tricky into itself, because we, you know, had to get the domain names that we were using white labeled and saying, no, I know this is a phishing attempt, but we want it to go through. whereas the browsers themselves were blocking that, which is really nice. So it was really hard to actually phish to get through some of the default things as a browser. But yeah, absolutely training. That sounds great, Kent and Angela. Dana, one thing you would say.
So actually two things. I want to add on to what Chris and Kent said. You know, don't spend the money or invest the time and trouble with your internal resources, which you don't have many of to begin with, to create something from scratch. Rely on the experts that are out there that offer these services and these solutions. Number two, I can't emphasize how important training is, especially during these times. I would say that your cybersecurity group should be working more with HR and working more with their company leaders to influence the culture of the company.
Excellent advice from everybody. I want to thank you very much. This concludes the panel part of the conversation. I did want to leave, as I mentioned, that 10 to 15 minutes for questions. I can't thank you enough. I am going to turn this over to Mindgrub's Chief of Staff and our practice leader for cybersecurity, Kim Paradise. Kim's been in the cyber industry for a number of years, and I was very pleased to get her on board at Mindgrub a couple of years ago and really start this focus for Mindgrub on cyber. So Kim, I can't thank you enough. I'm curious to hear some of the questions that we've had for the panelists. So let us know.
Great, thank you, Todd, and great job, everyone. So here's one of the questions, and this was actually addressed to all panelists, so feel free. I think, Dana, this might be one for you. If you're not someone who might be traditionally in charge of cybersecurity in your organization, but you see a need for it, what's the best way to make the case for investing in an audit or training for your company's leadership?
So it's kind of funny. I've been you know, for many years, been in situations where you go in front of the leaders and you tell them that you need to spend money for X, Y, Z, and they always ask the question, what's everybody else doing? Or they'll spend the money to get some expert to come in and tell them exactly what you told them. That said, for less than $3,500, and it depends on the size of the company, you could have somebody come in, take a look at your company, look at business outcomes, because cybersecurity needs to be, needs to be a result of your business outcomes. And that's the first mistake a lot of companies do. They go out there and they Google what a cybersecurity program should look like, and they don't look at your industry, your company, and what your business outcomes are, what you're trying to secure. So I would say just consult, bring somebody in a consult capacity, let them take a look at your company, let them interview key people in the company, and come back to you and tell you what your high level risks are. And then you have what you need to go in front of the board or go in front of the security council, wherever you report to put in a justification on spending some type of money. And again, cybersecurity should be put together in such a way that it matures over time. You don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in a program that may not even be effective for your organization. You need to, chunk it is the word I like to use, and start small and grow upon that and do it based on your company's outcomes.
Yeah, I would add to that, to what Dana said, in terms of, the best case for making the investment really is the word that he used around risk, right? What's the risk of not making the investment? And I'll tell you, the quickest way to lose your customer base is to compromise their information and lose their trust. So the risk of not making those investments and training your folks and making sure that you're securing data is great. It's very great in terms of your company's reputation and brand and customer base.
Great. Does anyone else want to add to that? If not, I'll go to another question. So this is from Steve Braun. He asks, back to the password discussion, do you recommend any password places such as LastPass? Any recommendations that they could use?
Oh, I have one. The Easy Shield mobile app has a great password manager.
There you go. Anyone else?
I'll say this for enterprises, even small and large, we're starting to see a really big push to actually get the single sign-on strategy, where they sort of have for certain administrative functions, they'll go to a privileged access management tool or a LastPass, even if you're going kind of smaller scale. And those are great tools, and as long as you use them the way they're designed, they work really well, especially for teams. But the single sign-on solutions like an Okta and others out there that can actually help to integrate all your systems for your enterprise users, they've become a lot easier. They're a lot more approachable than they were maybe even 10 years ago. They used to be this massive endeavor to get them deployed. And I think because we've seen this proliferation of APIs and other solutions out there that make these integrations a lot more simple and turnkey, and support for some of the major brands, it's become a lot less intimidating to get those deployed.
Yeah, Chris, and this is Dana, and I think that's a great point. And I would tell you, up until the last 18 months or so, I was not a proponent of single sign-on, because here's the thing: single sign-on makes it easier, but if you have a single sign-on password and someone guesses that password, they can get into everything you have access to. The good news is now with these tools, they have a way to better segment that within the single sign-on feature. So yeah, that's something you should look into.
Yeah,
and even just to add one little point there. And they've actually added even behavioral monitoring now to these tools, where they'll say like, you're in a place you've never been.
Yes.
The escalation of privilege should that should be a red flag, and they've been building some intelligence, and it's really been exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's like, Netflix, when I log in, it says, hey, we've noticed 13 logins in 20 other locations. I'm like, yeah, that's my 7 kids. All those logins for sure. But I do like the 2-factor authentication that I see, and like, Gmail and stuff. That's very helpful for sure.
Absolutely. So we have one more question right now. This is directed at Angela. Since the elevated risk of cyber attack doesn't just affect companies, but also individuals, how can businesses offer cybersecurity software or services to their employees as a benefit that not only helps with talent acquisition and retention, but also can mitigate the cyber risk to the company itself?
Love that question.
That is a good question.
Thanks for asking.
Good.
This is our business, right? At Sontiq, we have solutions that combine both protecting the business and the employees from cyber threats and identity crimes and scams and fraud of all kinds. What we would say is, obviously our solutions employ things like our mobile defense suite, where mobile devices are probably one of the biggest risk factors there are to both your own personal information, because it's become our left arm, and everything we have is on our phones, to the gateway to the business. So the mobile defense suite of our product is fantastic and employs a VPN and other cybersecurity capabilities. Being proactive in monitoring the dark web, enrolling in an identity theft protection program for either the business or the consumer is such a huge proactive step, and it really helps to mitigate losses before they happen. It really can clue people in that there is something going on before the worst happens. So, benefit programs, we have a great Identity Force employee benefit program. I didn't realize this was going to be a plug, so thank you for that. But there's just so much to be said about being proactive and putting the controls in place to monitor whether or not your information's been compromised.
Great. So I know we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to turn it back over to Todd and let you see if there's any closing remarks or anything else that anyone wants to say. And I'll let you guys finish up. But great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for everybody for the questions. We do have just a couple minutes here, so I will give everybody just a last chance to tell us again about your business and how you can help us with our cybersecurity needs. So we'll go in reverse order now. Dana, remind me again about the business and how you can help us with cybersecurity.
Yeah, so real quick, most people, when they think of Everest Performance Solutions, they think about project management, program management, primarily for the government space. About 3.5, 4 years ago, our Chief Operating Officer wanted to jumpstart a cybersecurity arm in the commercial space. So basically what we've done, we have created services. We're not the solution business, we partner with people who have the back-end solutions, but we front-end solutions with services. And we do everything from augment your cybersecurity staff. We'll come in and actually run your entire cybersecurity program for you. We do what we call a continuous pen test, not a point-in-time pen test. We'll do an engagement. We'll do vulnerability assessment and pen tests through an entire cycle, whether that's quarterly, yearly, or what have you. We also have an information governance service, as well as a third-party vendor service. We'll come in and work with you to help get all your third-party vendors under a secured platform, if you will. So basically, we do everything from soup to nuts, and we like to think that we do it at a price point that I will say this, that I wish that when I was a CISO for a big company would have been offered to me. So I'm very proud and honored to be working for a company like Edwards, and some of the panelists that are on today, we need to have some conversations about how we can partner with you guys to help get your solutions out there as well.
Thank you, Dana. I know, definitely talk to Kim, because we are partnering with a lot of cyber companies. We have over 100 clients that we maintain their software, and our worlds are coming together. Kent, tell us about Bricata again and how you help us with cybersecurity.
Sure. So yeah, Bricata is really laser focused on network visibility and hunting. And so, you know, at the end of the day, if you listen to Gartner, we fall into this network detection and response space. So for us, it's about giving people the ability to view in any sort of environments, a software-based solution that can be deployed in cloud environments, can be deployed on their own commodity hardware, and really just exposes people to a lot of great network visibility and the ability now to hunt proactively for those things that might be creating problems.
Great. Angela, tell us again about Sontiq.
Absolutely. So, you know, as I mentioned, Sontiq works with small businesses and consumers to help prevent identity crimes and fraud. We actually have a great free small business trial offer right now that I'm happy to connect anyone with, and a free identity theft protection trial. So, you know, again, these are the best ways to mitigate your employees or your business information from being compromised, and help your employees to ensure that they've got resources available to them in the event of fraud. That's probably the first thing we hear is, I don't know what to do. So that's what we're here for.
Excellent. And last but not least, Chris, tell us one last time about Blue Voyant and how you can help us with cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Thanks, Todd. The Blue Voyant as a company, we're really quite a broad segment of different services. So we have a practice that's just focused on 24/7 managed detection and response, providing that to companies that are global, but also not the biggest companies that you'll have to be using us. It's really SMB market focus. We have a lot of different technologies that we deliver to give correlated, very well thought out response anytime anything happens, and we help monitor and manage that infrastructure as well if needed for any a company that wants to have us handle that for them. And then we also have a big focus on threat intelligence. Businesses like ours, we believe a lot in the power of threat intelligence. If it's employed correctly, it can be extremely useful in detecting and understanding threats. And we've got a really, really powerful platform and a really smart team of people that come from some of the largest centers of excellence in the world that have powered that platform with their tradecraft and understanding of how to operate in the spaces where bad things have a tendency to start, and pick those problems apart and turn that into knowledge and response when needed. So I'm very proud to kind of be a part of that team and help lead our engineering efforts. But I think take a look at us, and there might be a way we can help you out.
Well, thank you, Chris. Yeah, definitely will be good. Chris, Angela, Kent, Dana, please do meet with Kim. I know we're partnering all over the place as a good consulting company. If we can help you with your custom software development, your marketing, or your ongoing creative and software support needs, please don't hesitate to reach out to Kim or myself at Mindgrub. Thank you everyone for being here today, for all the attendees and the great questions, and look forward to more additional installments of Mindgrub's virtual speaker series in the future.